His eyes bulged as a shoelace tightened, and nobody intervened that night. That's the kind of cruelty federal prosecutors said powered a new underworld crew in New York. Men who didn't just want money, but respect, fear, and control. Victims bled, begged, and sometimes lost more than cash. They lost dignity, they lost teeth, and in a few cases, they barely survived at all. By the early 2000s, the Italian crime families that had dominated organized crime for generations were used to threats. They were used to muscle. But this was different. This was colder, more desperate, more reckless. A rising force was pushing into territories that were supposed to be untouchable. Gambling clubs, loan sharking rackets, drug routes, challenging old rules with a new kind of violence. And it all leads back to a late-night meeting in New Jersey. It's late 2001 on the New Jersey Turnpike at a gas station rest area. An Albanian immigrant from the greater New York City area has been called to a meeting. His name is Alex Rudaj, a gang leader out of Queens who had muscled into the wrong turf. With him are his enforcers, Lusa Nukalic, Nicola Day, and Nardino Colotti, men known for doing the ugly work when words stopped working. Rudy's crew had attacked a gambling club, overseen by Arnold Squitieri, a Mafia boss whose reputation usually kept problems away. Usually. Squitieri didn't come alone. When Rude arrived, he walked into a show of authority. Around 20 armed Italian gangsters, waiting to make sure the message landed. Back off, stay in your lane, stop expanding. Then Nicola Day did something that stunned even seasoned mobsters. He raised a shotgun and aimed it at the gas pump. One blast, one spark, and everyone at that station could be turned into smoke and screams. It wasn't just a threat, it was a statement. They would rather die in an explosion than accept disrespect. That audacity didn't just shock the Italians, it got the FBI's attention. Because in the early 2000s, this wasn't a one-time stunt. It was a flare warning that something bigger was rising. These weren't business-savvy immigrants chasing the American dream. Many were survivors of a country collapsing. Civil war scars, hunger, trauma, and a communist regime that kept citizens trapped behind closed borders for decades. They arrived in America raw and angry, willing to do whatever it took to survive, including murder. This is the story of the Albanian Mafia in New York, how they rose from the ashes of their homeland's destruction to become what the FBI considers one of the fastest growing criminal threats in the world. And before the story gets darker, because it will, one quick note. If you want more gangster and mafia content, then hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Now back to the story. In Albania, guns weren't just common, they were everywhere. Some were even legal, one of thousands licensed in response to the surge of illegal weapons. Task forces tried to restrain armed gangs, seizing vehicles that didn't look like civilian property. A flatbed truck gets confiscated, and it isn't just suspicious, it's battle ready. That's not a hint, that's an omen. Doctors at places like Flora Central Hospital became experts in gunshot wounds because the wounds never stopped coming. To understand Albanian organized crime in New York, you have to understand what these men were running from. After World War II, Albania emerged under the iron grip of communist dictator Enver Hoxha. His regime is widely described as one of the most repressive totalitarian governments in Europe. In 1967, religion was outlawed. Through fear, systematic terror, the regime crushed traditions, moral values, and self-respect that had guided Albanian society for centuries. The country became isolated internationally. The economy collapsed into ruin. People were trapped, unable to leave, watched constantly by secret police known as the Sigurimi. In that environment, trust didn't come easily. Survival did. This was the Albania that shaped the men who would later terrorize New York's criminal underworld. Then the early 1990s arrived. Communist governments across the Balkans collapsed, and Albania attempted a shaky transition. But new didn't mean stable. The country was desperately poor. Infrastructure crumbled. People starved for opportunity. Law enforcement was overwhelmed. What rule of law existed often came in the form of heavily armed, sometimes disguised special forces. Even then, they weren't truly investigating crime. Most of the time, they were just trying to limit future crime by slowing the flow of weapons. But the weapons were already everywhere. Chaos followed. Thieves ran rampant. Children were kicked out of government-sponsored orphanages. Corruption didn't disappear. It simply changed uniforms. Then came the pyramid schemes. During the 1990s, Albania's legitimate financial system was in shambles. Into that vacuum stepped schemes promising unbelievable returns. 2/3 of the country invested. Many were run by former government agents and Romani thieves. At their peak, the liabilities amounted to almost half of Albania's entire GDP. And then, like every pyramid scheme, they collapsed. In 1997, the majority of investors lost everything. The country erupted into mass rioting. Opposition parties opened prisons and released inmates. Armories and depots were raided. Guns, explosives, and munitions were abandoned across the country, free for the taking. One young Albanian, Ketjol Manoku, later convicted of murder in Michigan, remembered 1997 vividly during a 2011 prison interview. He described sitting outside a mechanic shop at 17 with friends when a car pulled up. A man in the car brandished an AK-47, aimed it at his friend's chest, and fired. His friend died right there. That was Albania in 1997, and that reality would shape Manoku into a killer just 7 years later. Through all of this, one thing stayed constant: besa. Often translated as faith or trust, besa is closer to keeping honor. The concept appears in the Kanun, a set of traditional Albanian laws dating back to at least the 15th century. Passed down through oral tradition, it acted like a higher authority than any government. A pledge of honor could be as binding as a blood oath. That code became the foundation of Albanian organized crime. Gangs were built from relatives or men who'd known each other since childhood. Besa bound them for life, and betrayal was almost unthinkable. But like the oath culture in the Italian Mafia, that loyalty came with extreme violence. Albanian crews became known for using brutal force quickly and without hesitation. When they arrived in the United States in the early 2000s, they brought that mindset with them. Albanians had been arriving in New York in large numbers since the 1960s, often settling in Italian neighborhoods in the Bronx. But after the near financial collapse in 1997, Albanian crime groups rapidly expanded in the United States. By the early 2000s, Europol, the FBI, and Interpol recognized Albanian organized crime as a major threat. What linked the groups was besa, and a reputation for extreme violence. Geography helped. Albania sat in a prime corridor for drug trafficking, positioned between heroin-producing regions like Afghanistan and Turkey and the Western European countries that consumed it. Albanian criminals became the middlemen, moving product along routes that made fortunes. By the early 2000s, their networks were powerful enough to challenge New York's established crime families. FBI supervising agent Lou De Gregorio, who worked Italian mafia cases for 20 years, kept a copy of the Kanun on his desk. He said the Albanians reminded him of the old-school mafia. Still poor, still hungry, still desperate. The kind of desperation that doesn't negotiate. It takes. To see how that played out in America, the trail leads somewhere most people wouldn't expect. Michigan, Macomb and Oakland counties outside Detroit became home to a significant Albanian immigrant population. Strip malls, fast food jobs, cafes, bars, and restaurants created a pocket of people called Little Albania. It also became home to some of the most violent Albanian criminals in America. Men like Ketjol Manoku, Oliver Merko, and Edmund Zoitsa operated there. Soldiers shaped by Balkan chaos, carrying that code onto American streets. These weren't flashy mobsters in suits driving luxury cars for show. Manoku reportedly hated the hip-hop style many gangsters adopted. He wasn't chasing glamour. He was a soldier doing what soldiers do: collecting, enforcing, hurting. Manoku arrived in 2001, sneaking in through Mexico and speaking no English. He worked in restaurants, but quickly shifted into muscle work, pressuring people to pay debts. One major money stream was migrant smuggling. Albanian criminals smuggled migrants into America for fees of $12,000. Many paid $8,000 up front, then refused to pay the rest once safely inside the country. Manoku became the man sent to convince them. In at least one case, he said he broke a man's teeth and did time in county jail for it. That's the kind of enforcement that doesn't rely on threats, it uses pain. Manoku spent time in Albanian coffee shops around Detroit, where he met notorious figures like the Kranishi brothers, Bruno and Samir, and other Albanian gangsters like Dini Brian Marie. Then came July 2004. Tensions between Albanian groups in Michigan erupted. After a fight between a man named Kutim Karapici and Brian Mari, Manoku's crew kidnapped Karapici. They grabbed him in a parking lot, forced him into their car, and held him at gunpoint while Zoitsa pressed a knife close enough to make the message clear. During the chaos, Manoku's gun discharged accidentally. Karapici jumped out and ran, but it didn't end there. 2 weeks later, Karapici was summoned again, this time to the parking lot of the Toronto Cafe. He was picked up and driven to Brian Marie's apartment, where Mero and Florian Charny were waiting. Plastic was laid on the floor, presumably to catch blood. 10 to 20 kitchen knives were lined up on a table. Mero cursed at Karapici, threatened him, said he had been disrespected. Karapici begged. Mero let him live because he begged, then gave him an ultimatum. 2 days to come up with $1,000 for Brian Marie's medical bills, or he would be shot. Karapici told his father everything. The next day, Karapici and his dad met members of Manoku's crew at a public park. The father paid and pleaded for his son to be left alone. Years later, when a journalist reached out to Karapici in 2011, he said, "I have moved on and things are going good for me. Thank you for understanding." Karapici escaped the gangland spiral. Manoku didn't. On the night of July 17th, 2004, around 11:30 p.m., Manoku was in the parking lot of an apartment complex in Clawson. His friend Oliver Mero was getting married the next day. It should have been a calm night before a wedding. Instead, a van rolled in with 5 North boys inside. An AK-47 appeared out the window. Manoku dove under a bush where a 9mm had been stashed, grabbed it, and as the vehicle accelerated toward him, he fired. One of the 5, 20-year-old Marialaku, was shot dead. Prosecutors later charged Manoku, Mero, and Zoitsa with conspiracy and premeditated murder, arguing they had plotted over time to kill North boys more than once. Florian Charny testified against them. Prosecutors also pointed to other violence, including a coffee shop shooting and an AK-47 drive-by tied to Manoku's crew. The sentences ruined their futures. Zoitsa got life, Mero 8 life sentences, and Manoku 10. Over 20 years later, they remain incarcerated. Unlike Michigan's street soldiers, New York's Albanian crews were sophisticated, with better fronts and larger operations. The Kranishi brothers, Bruno and Samir, were described as gentlemen gangsters. Their polished appearance, suits, neat hair, Cadillacs, masked their danger and made them harder to profile. They ran a major drug trafficking ring, importing hundreds of pounds of Canadian marijuana for distribution across New York and beyond. They worked with others, including Pered Joka, often operating from Albanian coffee shops in Ridgewood, Queens. Their strength was a predatory sense for weakness, spotting cracks, exploiting them, taking over businesses, even if the rival was once a friend. One of those friends was Joka, a young and successful drug dealer from Albania who had been close to the Kranishis. But Joka was different. He felt too much. He cried at a loss. He struggled with the idea of killing people he once loved. Then tragedy struck. On October 19th, 2004, Yoka's girlfriend, artist-singer Anita Bitri, her mother, and her 8-year-old daughter died from carbon monoxide poisoning in her Staten Island home. Joka found the 3 bodies after noticing her disappearance and breaking in out of concern. The tragedy devastated him, leading to severe depression, crying, drug use, and constant talk of love, though visible grief was seen as weakness. Around the same time, the Kranishi brothers, wanting more money, turned on Joka and his friend Aryan Shahu, Lanka, who ran gambling rings for Alex Rude. The brothers shot up bars, refused to pay debts, and stole 25 pounds of marijuana from Joka. Yoki's crew, including Plurinella, Skinderd Sakonai, and Pered Joka, planned revenge, attempting to murder Bruno outside an Astoria strip club in July 2005. However, Yoka could not bring himself to kill his former friend. Bruno could. Later in July, Bruno, Samir, and Gentian Karsar drove to Cafe Amici in Queens, watched Aryan Shahu step out, and shot him 20 times. The violence escalated. In 2007, Gentian Karsar, along with Reginald Dervish, brother of a major Albanian drug dealer, was killed attempting to extort Ragnar Cafe owner Lulzim Kupi in a home invasion. Kupi shot back, killing Karsar. Dervish fled. The Kernishis next angered Toronto weed supplier Claudio Pereni, who forced their associate Ironic Grezda to set up Bruno. Grezda lured Bruno to a November 25, 2005 meeting where he was kidnapped, beaten, taken to Ohio, held by an Arab gangster, and driven to Frank Shastani's home. The kidnappers demanded $350,000 from Samir for Bruno's life. Under pressure, Samir and his lawyer contacted the FBI. Samir lied about his criminal activity. The FBI and a SWAT team followed him to a Detroit drop point on November 27th. Police arrested Shastani and tried to flip him to catch Claudio. Claudio panicked, dumped Bruno, still alive, in a field and called Samir. Bruno survived, but it came with a cost. Grezda had to die. On January 16, 2005, Samir, Bruno, Elton, Sidaris, and Grezda drove in Sidaris' mother's car, allegedly to Connecticut for money. Samir turned up the music, and Bruno shot Grezda dead in the car. They dumped the body off the BQE. It was an execution in a cramped back seat, carried out with the volume turned up to drown out conscience. By 2011, the Kernishis were caught. An FBI investigation led to murder and drug trafficking trials in Manhattan, exposing the operations of Albanian organized crime. Drug routes: Canada, Detroit, Bronx, internal conflict, and routine violence. Detroit coffee shops were part of a network from Canada to Albania, spanning the Bronx to Chicago. The Kernishis received multiple life sentences in 2011. While New York and Michigan were burning with crew wars, another major Albanian network thrived in New Jersey. This operation was led by Quitim Timmy Lear, a baseball cap-wearing gambler, and Mefit Mike Dika, with a bald eagle tattoo on his left bicep, and Death Before the Sun on his right arm. The FBI began investigating them in late 2003. What they uncovered became the target of Operation Black Eagle, described as the largest undercover infiltration of Albanian organized crime in FBI history. It was a 4-year investigation that culminated in spring 2009 with the largest federal racketeering case against an Albanian crime syndicate in the United States. The 26-member gang was tight-knit and hard to penetrate because of family ties and besa. But what made them even harder to police was how fluid they were. Less hierarchy, more corporation. They used planes to move drugs. In 2009, 2 aging pilots were caught flying 10 kilos of cocaine from Florida to the Ocean City airport for $15,000. The network had ties to Albania, Macedonia, Kosovo, Brooklyn, and Staten Island, and was headquartered in Paterson, New Jersey. The operation smuggled ecstasy, OxyContin, and marijuana from Canada, and cocaine from Florida, with plans for ecstasy from the Netherlands and heroin from Serbia and Turkey. Undercover agents bought over 30,000 ecstasy pills, 2.5 kilograms of heroin, and stolen jewelry, and offered money laundering. Wiretaps and video surveillance at the Royal Warsaw Restaurant and Borgata Casino aided the investigation. The takedown happened over 5 days in the chilly spring of 2009. 26 people were charged with narcotics and firearms trafficking, money laundering, interstate transportation of stolen property, and conspiracy. A Bentley and 2 private jets were seized, but only 22 members were arrested. 4 got away, including the 2 ringleaders, Timmy Lear and Mike Dika. Gazmir Jokar was arrested in Albania in November 2009, but Lear and Dika vanished into Toronto's large Albanian community. The FBI put them on the most wanted list, and their cases were featured on America's Most Wanted. Dika, a 45-year-old Wyckoff, New Jersey restaurant worker, went underground in Toronto after the March 2009 operation. He remained at large until his January 2010 arrest by the Toronto Fugitive Task Force during a car stop, aided by America's Most Wanted tips. Dika fought extradition for 2 years, but the kingpin everyone wanted, Timmy Lee, was still free. Authorities later said they found 13 passports and applications intended not just for Leah, but for his brother Nabil, a convicted cocaine trafficker, and other associates. Finally, on Thursday, May 24th, 2012, investigators got a tip. The next morning, a joint fugitive squad arrested Leah. The then 47-year-old appeared disheveled in a small apartment after years on the run. Not far away, another massive Albanian drug operation flourished in Queens. At its center was Enis Jerkovic, known simply as E, later described as an underboss of the Albanian Mafia. From 2000 to 2009, he moved massive quantities of drugs through Forest Hills, Queens, and up and down the East Coast. His network smuggled over 220,000 pounds of high-grade hydroponic marijuana from Canada into the US via the Akwesasne Native American Reservation, a critical border corridor between New York and Canada ideal for traffickers. Jerkovic's organization used speedboats, ATVs, tractor-trailers with hidden compartments, and modified cars. Once across the border, marijuana was shipped along the East Coast, with the bulk landing in the tri-state area. A multi-year DEA investigation out of Long Island slowly unraveled his empire. His weak point turned out to be Merson M.V. Kolinovic. On February 20th, 2008, Kolinovic was pulled over in Queens for a traffic violation while driving a 2006 Lexus without license plates. Police searched the vehicle and found 18 Ziploc bags of marijuana in the trunk. Kolinovic and passenger Slobodan Pavic were arrested. Kolinovic flipped immediately, wore a wire, and gave the DEA a direct line into the operation. One federal official later said his sloppiness triggered the collapse, driving on a suspended license while carrying 9 pounds of marijuana. Agents traced the network's routes from Canada through Chicago, Detroit, Texas, and back to Macedonia and Albania. The resulting seizure was massive: 50,000 pounds of hydroponically grown British Columbia marijuana, valued at $120, $150 million, that was smuggled across the border and distributed via Forest Hills. In 2012, Jerkovic received a 30-year sentence and a $2 million fine. While awaiting sentencing, he allegedly used his sister to deliver death threats against the judge, prosecutors, and DEA agent, leading to an obstruction of justice charge. According to the timeline, he was released in late 2025 and is reportedly free and back on the street. To understand the full scope, the story circles back to Alex Rude. Rude, an ethnic Albanian from Montenegro, immigrated in 1987. Prosecutors later called him the boss of the most significant Albanian organized crime group in America. Former members called it the Corporation. It began in the early 1990s in the Bronx. Rude ran it alongside Italian-American Nardino Colotti, who had ties to Gambino soldier Phil "Skinny" Loscalzo. When Loscalzo died and Colotti didn't receive the territory he expected, they broke away and founded the corporation in 1993. Federal authorities called it New York's sixth crime family. Predominantly Albanian but multi-ethnic, Greek, Arab, Italian, the group operated multi-million-dollar gambling dens. Unsatisfied with the territory allowed by the traditional 5 families, they sought more. In August 2001, Rude enforcer Lusa Nusilovic led an attack on a Greek social club in Queens called Soccer Fever. Rude and others entered with guns, beat patrons, overturned gambling tables, grabbed money, and knocked a player unconscious. Following an attack on a Gambino Greek gambling house, Colotti negotiated terms with Anthony Magali, the Gambino family's second in command. Federal agents later observed Colotti meeting Joseph Carredi, a Lucchese consigliere, after Rude encroached on Lucchese gambling houses. The violence wasn't hidden. In one case, Rude, Colotti, and Nicola "Nicky Nails" D-Day attacked a bar owner they'd loaned money to. He refused to pay and refused to give up his bar. Colotti tried biting the man's ear off while D-Day shoved a gun in his face. Weeks later came the New Jersey Turnpike rest area meeting arranged by Gambino acting boss Arnold Squitieri, Zeke. He brought around 20 armed mobsters with bats and guns. Rudy brought only 6 men, outnumbered more than 3-1. Scitieri told them to stop expanding. Weapons came out. The Italians had numbers. The Albanians had recklessness. One man pointed a gun at Scitieri's head. D-Day aimed the shotgun at the gas pump, finger on the trigger, ready to turn the station into a fireball. Eventually, they backed down. Talks followed. Rude was pressured to calm down, but the audacity escalated. In 2003, Rude showed up at Rao's, the East Harlem Italian restaurant legendary in organized crime circles, and demanded John Gotti's old table. Gotti had died 1 year earlier after spending his last decade in a 23-hour lockdown cell, cancer-ridden, while friends and family faced prison or murder. The table wasn't furniture, it was symbolism. Rude was refused, then returned with dozens of cronies. After a short, threatening conversation, the table became his. The message was clear. They weren't asking for respect, they were taking it. Federal prosecutor Jennifer Rogers detailed the corporation's brutal control, driven by fear. One defendant was commended for strangling an elderly man with a shoelace. Another complained a victim's blood dirtied his clothes. Their simple method, as D-Day described, they make mistakes somewhere, we move in and take it. As traditional Mafia leadership was being locked up in the early 2000s, especially within the Gambino administration, the Albanians moved fast, taking business in the chaos. But it didn't last. The massive 5-year FBI investigation using wiretaps, surveillance, and informants led to the October 26, 2004, arrest of Rude and 21 others. They faced charges including racketeering, attempted murder, extortion, and illegal gambling, marking the first federal racketeering case against an Albanian criminal enterprise, preceding the Kronišis' case by years. The trial lasted 3 months. On June 16, 2006, Alex Rude was sentenced to 27 years in federal prison. Over 20 members were charged, 6 top leaders were convicted, and 10 more pleaded guilty. The 6th family fell in just 5 years. And if all goes well for Rude, the timeline says he could be out in 2 years, returning to a world very different from the one he left, yet a gangland scene that hasn't really changed, except for the names. After Rudy's arrest, it was alleged that Rednal Dervish stepped in, and that Enis Jerkovic is now leading the Albanian mob. That's the pattern in this world. One name falls, another takes the seat, and the machine keeps moving forward. Besa may sound noble on paper, honor, loyalty, trust, but in the underworld it often becomes a binding force that leaves no room for weakness, only consequences. And this story doesn't really end here. The faces change, the names shift, but the structure remains. If you want more stories like this, dark, detailed, and told with a documentary edge, hit like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which case or crew you want next.